Mother's Day. The dining room smells of roasted chicken and fresh bread, the kind of scent that should make a mother feel cherished. Sunlight slants across the table, catching the silverware so they glint like tiny knives. I sit at the far end, my hands folded neatly in my lap, waiting. Sophia, my daughter-in-law, stands and clears her throat. She holds out a small parcel wrapped in cheap paper. The folds are uneven, the tape barely holding. "Here," she says, dropping it into my hands as though it burns her fingers. I peel back the thin paper, careful not to tear it, though my heart already feels shredded. Inside lies a faded apron, once white, now yellowed, its floral pattern rubbed almost to ghosts. The fabric smells faintly of mothballs. Sophia's lips curl into a smirk. She tilts her head, her voice sharp enough to cut through the air. "This suits your mother-in-law better, old cheap, just like her." For a moment, the room is silent. Utensils hover midair. Then the clink of Daniel's fork against his plate shatters the pause. My son doesn't look up. He doesn't defend me. He just keeps chewing, eyes fixed on the food as if it were the most important thing in the world. My fingers tighten around the apron. The fabric scratches against my skin, brittle and tired like me, perhaps, in her eyes. I force a smile, though I feel it crack across my face. My throat tightens. Heat rises behind my eyes, but I will not give her my tears. The clock on the wall ticks too loudly. The chair creaks beneath me. My pulse hammers against my ribs. I try to breathe, but the air tastes stale, as though someone has opened a window and let all the warmth escape. Sophia sips her wine, satisfied, her eyes glinting with a private triumph. Daniel clears his throat but says nothing. I fold the apron slowly, carefully, as if it were fragile glass, though every thread feels like a chain tightening around me. And in that moment, the words rise in my chest, unspoken, burning, louder than the silence. Mother's Day, and I feel like a maid in my own home. When I was a young woman, chalk dust clung to my skirts the way perfume clings to others. For 40 years I stood before blackboards, writing out long division and spelling words, watching small faces scrunch in confusion and light up in triumph. My salary was modest, barely enough to cover rent, groceries, and a few secondhand dresses. But I saved. Every month, I tucked away a little $50, then 100 like seeds pressed into soil, believing they would bloom for my family's future. When my husband passed, the house felt cavernous, every room echoing with the emptiness of his absence. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the checkbook, the savings account, the insurance payout. Grief pressed down, heavy as wet wool, but in the middle of it, Daniel's voice pierced through. "Mom," he said, his hand on mine, "I just need a start. With $100,000, I can open the company I've been dreaming of. You'll be proud." $100,000. It was almost everything I had set aside, the product of decades of frugal meals and skipped vacations. I thought of the children I'd taught, repeating lessons about generosity, about helping others grow. How could I deny my own son? So, I wrote the check. My hand trembled, not from reluctance but from the weight of love. I slid it across the table, and when he hugged me, tears pressed hot against my eyelids. At least this way, my husband's death would mean something. His absence funding. Our son's future. The years that followed were not easy. Without a car, I walked to the bus stop each morning, clutching my grocery bag and my umbrella, rain or shine. I sold the family sedan to save on insurance and maintenance, convincing myself that exercise was good for me. Every month, I wired another $1,000 to Daniel and Sophia, just to keep them afloat. I still remember the click of the bank teller's keyboard, the receipt warm in my hand, the balance in my account shrinking little by little, but I told myself it was worth it. Parents give. Parents sacrifice. I took pride in it. When neighbors asked, I smiled. I taught children their first words, their first numbers, and I'm helping my own son build his first company. But whispers travel faster than pride. One evening, as I carried a casserole dish into the dining room, I caught Sophia's voice floating from the kitchen. "Your mom thinks she's clever?" she murmured, her tone dripping with disdain. "But all she has is old books and small savings. That's hardly impressive. My feet froze. The casserole trembled in my hands. I pressed my back against the doorframe, listening, my throat tightening. Daniel didn't defend me. He only sighed. I stepped away quietly, pretending I hadn't heard. But the words clung like burrs to my skin, impossible to shake off. Lever. Old books, small savings, as though the very things that defined my life's work were nothing but scraps. In the corner of my bedroom stands a stack of worn textbooks, the same ones I used in class for decades. Pages yellowed, margins scrawled with notes, paper covers curling. Children once sat at desks tracing letters from those pages, reciting aloud as I tapped the rhythm on my desk. To me, those books are monuments. To Sophia, they're clutter. Sometimes I run my fingers along the spines, feeling the dust collect beneath my nails. Each book is a piece of me, a record of late nights preparing lessons, of mornings when my voice went hoarse from reading aloud. I used to believe that Daniel would see them the way I do, as symbols of discipline, of patience, of sacrifice. I thought he'd understand that his college tuition, his first car, even the roof over his head were built on the back of those lesson plans and saved pennies. But standing in the shadows, listening to Sophia dismiss my life's work as nothing, I realized the truth. I once believed those old textbooks were proof enough for my son to understand his mother's love, but to him, they are only scraps of paper. That night, long after the dishes had been cleared and the laughter from the living room had faded, I sat alone in my bedroom. The lamp cast a yellow pool of light over the stack of textbooks in the corner. Dust covered their spines like a shroud, and for a moment, I wondered if I too had become just another relic gathering dust in my own house. I reached out and lifted one of the books. Basic English for Grade 3. The cover was cracked. The corners curled from years of small hands flipping through its pages. I pressed it against my chest, and the smell of old paper rose, sharp and sweet, like a memory. Eleanor, I whispered to myself, you taught hundreds of children to respect others. You drilled into them the value of words, of kindness, of gratitude. How have you let your own family strip you of those very lessons? The silence answered back, heavy and merciless. I closed my eyes, the words rising again inside me. If you stay quiet. Aren't you erasing yourself? I set the book down and stood. My knees ached, but the resolve in my chest was stronger than the pain in my bones. I walked to the desk where my checkbook lay. Beside the small box of receipts and transfer slips, the pile looked less like financial records and more like chains proof of every month. I had handed over another piece of myself. For the first time in years, I opened my laptop, fingers trembling slightly as I typed in my online banking login. The screen glowed blue, illuminating the lines on my face. My password. Daniel's birthday. The irony stung. I sat there, staring at the cursor blinking in the password field. My heart thudded in my ears. Could I really do it? Stop the transfers? Break the pattern of decades? I thought of Sophia's smirk, of her voice dripping with disdain as she called me old, cheap, irrelevant. I thought of Daniel's silence, sharper than any insult. My hand steadied. Slowly, deliberately, I began typing a new password. My own birthday this time. The sound of each key echoed in the still room. And when I pressed enter, the system confirmed, password successfully changed. A single decisive click, like the bolt of a door sliding shut. The transfers would stop. The automatic drafts, gone. No more monthly bleeding of my savings into a bottomless pit of entitlement. I leaned back in my chair, breathless. For a moment I was afraid. What if they found out? What if they turned against me, made my life unbearable? But then another thought followed. Calmer, firmer. Hadn't they already done that? The fear melted into something else. Relief. The kind of relief you feel after grading the last exam of the year, when the silence of the classroom means the work is finally done. I glanced back at the stack of textbooks in the corner. For years, I had let Daniel and Sophia scribble over my life like careless children doodling in margins, erasing the words I had written with my own effort. Not anymore, I whispered aloud, voice shaking but resolute. I am no longer a page for anyone else to write on. I will write my own chapter. It didn't take long for them to notice. The next morning, the house buzzed with tension. Daniel stormed into the living room, his footsteps heavy against the hardwood floor. Sophia followed close behind, her heels clicking like gunshots. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice low but shaking with fury, "you can't just cut us off. We relied on you." I looked up from the armchair where I sat, the stack of textbooks resting quietly on the side table like silent witnesses. My hands stayed folded in my lap, but my gaze was steady. "I relied on myself for 70 years, I answered softly, my voice carrying across the room. "You can start now." Daniel's jaw clenched, his fists opened and closed as though he wanted to crush the air itself. He turned to Sophia as if searching for strength, and she did not disappoint. She slammed a folder onto the coffee table, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot. Papers spilled across the surface, legal forms, contracts, thick with menace. "Enough of this game," Sophia snapped. "Sign this paper. Give us the house. You don't need it. You can live in the guest room. Or better, some nursing home. It's what old women like you are made for." Her words struck like slaps. My heart pounded, but I kept my face still, the years of classroom discipline returning to me now. How many times had I silenced a rowdy class with nothing but a raised eyebrow? I summoned that same calm now. I reached for the pen lying on the table. Daniel exhaled with relief. Sophia smirked in triumph. But instead of lowering the pen to the page, I held it upright between my fingers. For a long moment, I studied the ink glinting under the light. Then, slowly, deliberately, I tore the paper in half. The sound was crisp, final like the tearing of fabric that can never be mended. Sophia gasped. Daniel stepped forward as though to snatch the shredded pieces from my hands, but I dropped them onto the table. They fluttered down like defeated soldiers. "Are you insane?" Sophia shouted, her face red, her fists shaking. I rose to my feet. My knees ached, but I stood tall, taller than I had in years. My voice, when it came, was calm but sharp enough to slice through the fury swirling in the room. "I was never your unpaid maid. I was a teacher. And I am still teaching you. This is my last lesson." The room fell silent. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. Sophia's glare wavered. And in that stillness, I realized something. I was no longer afraid. Word travels quickly in small towns. Within a week, I began noticing the looks, neighbors tilting their heads, their smiles just a fraction too tight. One woman from church pressed my hand and whispered, "If you ever need help remembering things, dear, we're here." I didn't understand at first. Then I heard it. Sophia's voice, dripping with pity, disguised as concern. "Eleanor's not herself anymore. She forgets things. Sometimes she wanders. Daniel and I are just trying to protect her." Protect me. The word burned. One afternoon, a heavy envelope arrived in the mail, its seal stiff and cold. I tore it open and felt my stomach twist. A summons. They had filed a petition to place me under guardianship, claiming I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. They wanted my house. They wanted everything. My hands shook as I held the papers. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The words blurred. Guardianship. Incapacitated. Transfer of property. It was as if my entire life, every hour spent teaching children their first letters, every dollar saved by skipping meals, had been erased with the stroke of a pen. But then something inside me stiffened. Fear gave way to anger. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Carter Law Offices," a steady voice answered. "This is Eleanor White," I said, my throat tight. "I need help. They're trying to take my home." That night, I searched Daniel's study. I don't know what I was hoping to find. Maybe a clue. Maybe nothing. My fingers skimmed across drawers filled with invoices and receipts. Then, in the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of utility bills, I saw it, a form, folded once, tucked hastily. I pulled it out and unfolded it. My heart stopped. It was an authorization document granting Daniel power over my property, and at the bottom, my signature. Except it wasn't mine. The handwriting imitated the loops of my E, the slant of my W. But it was clumsy, careless. The cross on the TT fell too high. The dot above the EI was a slash. My hand trembled, but not with weakness, with fury. I whispered into the empty room, my voice low, trembling but sharp. You copied my name, but you'll never copy my voice. The paper quivered in my grip. For a moment, I wanted to tear it to shreds. Instead, I slid it into an envelope. Evidence. Proof. The next morning, I met with Mr. Persing, Carter. His office smelled of leather and dust, books lining the shelves from floor to ceiling. He adjusted his glasses as he examined the forged document. They overplayed their hand, he said, tapping the paper. This forgery could turn the case in your favor. I nodded, my pulse racing. I don't want to destroy them. I just want to be free. He gave me a small smile. Then let's fight for your freedom. Later that week, I called an old friend, Mrs. Busy Green, a retired teacher who once shared a classroom wall with mine. When I told her what had happened, she didn't hesitate. I've known you 40 years, she said firmly. Your memory's sharper than mine, Eleanor. I'll testify to that. Her words steadied me, like chalk scratching clean letters across a blackboard. As I hung up, I glanced toward the stack of textbooks still waiting in the corner of my bedroom. They had always been my proof of who I was, of the life I lived. And now, they would become part of my shield. They could forge my signature, but they could never erase the memory of a woman who once taught children how to write. I didn't plan to search his desk. I only went in to return a utility bill that had arrived in my name. One more thread they were trying to pull from the sweater of my life. But the room smelled of cold coffee and stale cologne. And something in me refused to leave without looking. The bottom drawer stuck. I tugged once, twice, and it slid open with a tired groan. Folders. Receipts. Warranty cards for gadgets I never wanted. Beneath a stack of envelopes, I found a single sheet, folded twice, as if hiding would make it moral. I unfolded it on the desk. The paper rasped under my fingers. An authorization, transfer of property, power to manage accounts. Legal words marching in a straight line toward my erasure. At the bottom, a signature that wore my name like a stolen coat. My E was wrong, the loop too fat. The WW tilted forward, impatient. The T in white crossed like a fencing sword, not my quiet bar. Whoever faked it knew my letters but not my hand. They could mimic the shape. They could not mimic the weight. My breath sawed in my throat. For a moment I wanted to tear it down the middle, to shred the lie into confetti and throw it in the air like a victory no one had earned. Instead, I pressed the page flat, smoothed the crease, and took out my phone to photograph every line. I heard a car door outside. Voices. Time shrank to the thin edge of a blade. I slid the document into a manila envelope and tucked it beneath my cardigan. I closed the drawer, wiped the dust from my fingertips, and stood very still as footsteps crossed the porch. The doorknob turned. Laughter. Keys on the bowl. I stepped into the hallway as if I had only just arrived. Everything okay, Mom? Daniel asked, eyebrows raised. Fine, I said, and felt the word settle in my mouth like a small iron weight. Fine, for the first time in a very long time. In my bedroom, I locked the door and laid the paper on the bedspread like a patient. 40 years teaching children to read had trained my eyes to see patterns, to spot the one crooked letter in a sea of neat ones. This signature was a forest of crooked letters. I leaned close, whispering into the quiet. You copied my name, but you'll never copy my voice. I slid the paper back into the envelope and wrote the date on the flap-in. Neat teacher script. Evidence Class 101. Chain of custody. Chalkboard rules turned courtroom rules. The fear I had carried like a backpack loosened its straps. Not gone, but lighter. I had something solid. A page that would not obey them. A page that would speak. Punchline. Mum. I was not their forged signature. I was the hand that still writes. I was the hand that still writes. Mr. Carter's office was a library disguised as a law firm, shelves from floor. to ceiling, spines lined like soldiers. He read the forged document twice, then a third time, tapping the margin with a capped pen. "They'll argue competency," he said. "We'll answer with proof. Dates. Records. People who have seen you make decisions recently and clearly. Proof." That was a language I spoke. We built a list. The bank clerk who watched me change my password. The pharmacist who reviewed my prescriptions with me each month, Mrs. Green from the school, who still traded lesson plans with me for the joy of it. I called each person, my voice steadying as the promises came in. "Of course, Eleanor. We'll be there. We know you. Tax." At home, I turned my kitchen table into a courtroom of paper. Statements, receipts, bank logs, printed call histories. I labeled folders with the calm authority I used to label reading groups. Timeline, witnesses, health, forgery. I slipped the forged authorization into a plastic sleeve, as if it were a brittle leaf I meant to preserve. Every page got a sticky note. Every sticky note got a verb. At dusk, I stood in front of the hallway mirror and practiced saying my name. Eleanor White. It sounded too small. I tried again, the way I had taught shy children to project from the diaphragm. "I am Eleanor White." Better. I lifted my chin. I taught for 40 years. I managed my own bills. I changed my banking password on May 14th at 9037 a.m. I did not sign away my house. This signature is not mine. I watched my mouth shape the words. A teacher grading her own diction. When my voice thinned, I paused, drank water, started over. When my hands trembled, I placed a textbook in each palm like weights and breathed until the tremor quieted. On the second night, Mrs. Judd just didn't Mrs. did. Green came by with lemon bars and a yellow legal pad. We rehearsed questions Mr. Carter might ask, and the ones the other side would throw like stones. "What will you say when they call you forgetful?" she asked. "That I memorize my former students' birthdays out of habit," I said, and rattled off 3 without thinking. We laughed, then didn't. "What will you do if Daniel looks at you?" she asked softly. "I'll look back," I said, "and I'll tell the truth." We practiced until the streetlights clicked on. When she left, I placed one of my old textbooks on the kitchen chair I would sit in during testimony. Its weight grounded the room. The night before the hearing, sleep wrinkled away from me. I brewed tea, then left it untouched. I walked to the window and lifted the apron from its hook. The fabric was still rough, the faded flowers stubbornly cheerful. Once it had been an insult. Now it was a prop, a reminder that names and objects only have the power we give them. I folded it, set it beside my folders, and pressed my palm to the stack. "This is my lesson plan," I told the empty room. "And I'm ready to teach." At dawn, I dressed with the precision of a first day of school. Sensible shoes, navy skirt. The pearl earrings my husband bought me when Daniel was born. In the mirror I saw my mother's posture, my own steadiness, a future I refused to surrender. Mr. Carter met me on the courthouse steps. "Breathe," he said. "I have," I answered, surprising myself with a smile. All week long. We walked through the metal detector, our papers in order. The air inside was cool, too clean. I pressed my fingertips to the folder labeled forgery and felt the ridges of the plastic sleeve beneath. If they wanted a frail woman to fold, they had misread the syllabus. Punchline. I was not their trembling witness. I was the lesson they would never forget. The courtroom hums the way a fluorescent light hums. Cold, persistent, a sound that makes your teeth ache. People crowd the benches, faces I half know from church and the grocery store. Their whispers rustle like paper. At the front, the judge sits beneath a wash of white light that makes the varnish on the wood gleam. On the left, Daniel and Sophia. On the right, Mr. Carter and me. I fold my hands on the table, lining my fingers the way I used to align chalk sticks on the tray. I inhale. The air smells of polish and old carpet and something like fear. When the clerk announces the case, Sophia begins to cry, small sobs at first, then a tremor that shudders her shoulders. She leans into Daniel. He puts an arm around her and nods as if he has been carrying a saint's burden. Their lawyer rises, smooth and sure. Your Honor, he begins, this is a sad matter. Mrs. White is a beloved member of our community. But time and illness spare no one. My clients seek guardianship to protect her, her person, her property from poor judgment that has already put her at risk. He calls the first witness, a doctor whose name I recognize from advertisements. The man takes the stand and swears in. He explains that he performed a brief cognitive screening at Sophia's request. I detected deficits, he says, tapping a chart. Word recall. Executive function. Mr. Carter stands. Doctor, how long did your evaluation take? 20 minutes. And you based your conclusions on that alone? A standardized assessment? The doctor replies, a touch defensive. A validated instrument. Did you review Mrs. Bottery White's banking records? Speak with her pharmacist? Her neighbors? Anyone who has interacted with her over time? No, the doctor says. That wasn't requested. Mr. Carter nods, as if the answer is a line he expected his students to miss on a pop quiz. He sits. Sophia is next. On the stand, the tears brighten. She dabs at them with a tissue, voice shaking just enough to carry across the room. Eleanor forgets things, she says. She leaves the stove on. She misplaces money. She can't manage a house this big. We only want to keep her safe. She looks at me then, eyes soft, like a teacher asking for sympathy from a child. I hold her gaze. The tissue trembles in her hand, a small white flag that never meant surrender. Mr. Carter does not raise his voice when he cross-examines. He doesn't need to. Mrs. White leaves the stove on? He asks. When was that? Last month, she says quickly. Or the month before? Which? He asks. She falters. Well, around then. Did you call the fire department? A repair service? No. Any photos? A bill? A text? Her mouth thins. No. Thank you, he says and sits. Daniel testifies afterwards. He tells the court, I've always been generous, but lately I've been erratic. The word lands between us like a chalkboard eraser thrown too hard. He folds his hands to mimic concern, but I watch his knuckles whiten as he speaks. He avoids my eyes. Mr. Carter rises again. Mr. White, how much money has your mother contributed to your household in the past? 10 years? Daniel glances at his lawyer. I don't recall. Would bank statements refresh your recollection? I suppose. Mr. Carter sets a folder on the ledge. Your Honor, Defense Exhibit A. He flips pages with the quiet rhythm of a metronome. Let me help. $1,000 a month for 118 months. Plus, a separate cashier's check for $100,000 to fund your business. Does that approximate your memory? The room shifts. Someone coughs. Daniel swallows. Yes, he says, softer than before. And when your mother asked questions about expenses, did you call her clever or controlling? Daniel hesitates. Oh, we had disagreements. Did your wife refer to your mother's life's work as old books and small savings? His jaw tightens. I don't remember. That's all, Mr. Carter says, voice mild, and sips. When it's our turn, Mr. Carter begins as if he is laying out a lesson plan. Your Honor, he says, we will show capacity through consistency, through corroboration, through the ordinary acts of an ordinary life done competently and repeatedly. He calls the banker first. The teller, a young man with careful hair, testifies, Mrs. White came in on May 14th. She changed her password without assistance. She asked to disable automatic transfers. She signed the confirmation form. She also asked me to explain the fraud alert settings, and she set them herself. He holds up a stamped printout. The judge nods, makes a note. The pharmacist takes the stand next. I review Mrs. White's medications with her monthly, she says. She keeps a written schedule she created herself. She knows each dose by name, time, and reason. She asks clear questions. Then Mrs. Green walks to the stand, spine straight, eyes bright. She wears the kind of cardigan only teachers can pull off without irony. She takes the oath as if reciting the pledge with second graders. I taught next door to Eleanor for 20 years, she says. We traded lesson plans. If you want a witness to competence, ask another teacher. The courtroom chuckles softly, the first sound of warmth all day. She still writes study guides for fun. Mrs. Green continues. Last week she corrected my punctuation, gently, which is more than I can say for myself at her age. Has she seemed confused? Mr. Carter asks. Only about why generosity is repaid with contempt, Mrs. Prade. Green says evenly. The judge looks up. The words hang in the air like a bell tone after dismissal. Mr. Carter turns to me. Mrs. White, he says, please take the stand. My legs carry me farther than fear would allow. I settle into the wooden chair, palm on the armrest, the way I used to steady a wobbly desk. I raise my right hand and swear in. The microphone sits too low. I adjust it. A small, ordinary act. It steadies me. Mrs. Biss, White, Mr. Carter begins, tell the court who you are. I clear my throat. I am Eleanor White, I say, voice low but level. 71. A retired elementary school teacher. He nods. Did you change your banking password on May 14th? Yes. Without assistance? Yes. Did you authorize any person to manage or transfer your property? No. Do you recognize this document? He asks, holding up a plastic-sleeved page. I do. The forgery. My name in a costume that doesn't fit. I recognize the attempt, I say. But that is not my signature. How can you tell? I lean toward the page. My E is always narrow. One is bloated. My W sits upright. This one slants forward. I cross my T with a straight bar. This one swings like a scythe. I look at the judge. I taught handwriting for decades. You cannot teach a hand you do not have. He lets the sentence walk around the room before he speaks again. Mrs. White, why did you stop the transfers? Because I realized charity that erases the giver is not charity. It is disappearance. I breathe. I could feel myself being written over. He nods once, gently. No further questions. Their lawyer approaches for cross-examination. He smiles as if I were an easily distracted student. Mrs. White, he says, isn't it true that you forget things, names, dates? Sometimes, I say. So do you, so does everyone. He blinks. Did you ever misplace money? I once left $20 in a gardening book and found it a month later. I wrote it down. It's in the ledger. He flips through his notes, not finding the page he needs. Have you left the stove on? Not since 2016, I say. I installed Auto Shutoff after that. Receipt in the home maintenance folder, tab C. A ripple of amusement moves through the gallery. His smile thins. Mrs. White, would you say your daughter-in-law has your best interests at heart? I would say she has her interests at heart, I answer, and I know what mine are. He retreats. Mr. Carter calls one last witness, the bank security officer. The man testifies about the IP addresses, the login changes, the two-factor authentication codes sent to my phone, all initiated by Mrs. Burses. White, he says. No anomalies. Then Mr. Carter rests, and the judge calls for closing arguments. Their lawyer talks about mercy and protection. He uses phrases like, for her own good. He paints a picture of a widow adrift. He avoids numbers, dates, facts, the way students avoid the hard part of a problem. Mr. Carter doesn't pace. He plants his feet. Capacity isn't perfection, he says. It's the steady line of ordinary responsibility. Mrs. White pays her bills, follows her medication plan, changes her password, and says no when no is appropriate. The petitioners have offered sentiment and conjecture. We have offered records, witnesses, and the handwriting of a woman who has written her own life. He pauses. And when affection was not returned with respect, she did not lash out. She set a boundary. That is not incompetence. That is prudence. The judge leans back, fingers steepled, gaze moving from one table to the other. The room is so quiet, I can hear the fluorescent hum again. I look at Daniel. He meets my eyes for the first time. There is something like pleading there. Or maybe it is only exhaustion. The judge clears his throat. Mrs. White, he says. Would you like to make a statement before the court rules? I rise. My knees protest, but my spine remembers how to stand in front of a room. I rest my fingertips on the rail. The microphone is exactly where I left it. I draw breath, not from the throat but from low in the lungs. The way I taught shy children to do when they had to read aloud. I am Eleanor White, 71, a retired teacher, I say, and my voice carries to the back row. I gave my life to raise children who were not mine. I will not be erased by the children of my own blood. Silence folds around the words. Ah! No one coughs. No one moves. For a heartbeat, even the lights seem to listen. The judge nods once, as if something has clicked into place. He looks down at his notes, then up again. This court finds insufficient evidence of incapacity, he says. The petition for guardianship is denied. All claims to control Mrs. FIA, Trax, White's property are dismissed. The court further finds that the purported authorization is not credible and will be referred for appropriate review. A murmur runs through the room. Sophia's mouth opens. Opens! Daniel's shoulders drop, and for the first time since this began, he looks smaller than his suit. I do not cheer. I do not cry. I exhale. It feels like the last bell of the year, the sound that sends children rushing into summer. The judge raps the gavel. We are adjourned. Chairs scrape. People stand. Mr. Carter turns to me, his eyes softer than I have seen them. You did well, he says. I taught for a living, I answer. I remember how. We collect our papers. As I slide the forged document back into its sleeve, I think of the children who once held their pencils too tight, their letters stubborn and crooked until something finally clicked and the line ran straight. Some lessons only take when the hand is ready. In the aisle, Daniel steps into my path. For a flicker, he is 8 again. Cow-licked hair, scraped knees, eyes darting toward mine to see if everything will be okay. He opens his mouth, closes it, tries again. Mom, he says, and the word sounds like a question he doesn't know how to ask. I know, I say. It is not forgiveness. Not yet. It is the space where a lesson can begin if he wants it. I walk past him into the sun-glossed hallway. The white light softens there, warmed by the afternoon. Outside, the sky is a deep, forgiving blue. People stream down the steps, their conversations picking up where the silence left off. Mr. Carter holds the door for me. I step through it as if crossing a threshold I have been approaching for years. On the top step, I pause and look back. Once. The courtroom door swings shut, and with it a chapter closes cleanly, without torn edges. I touch the folder in my arms. The ledger of my ordinary competence. The record of the life I refuse to hand over. Somewhere inside, the forged signature lies quiet, trapped in its plastic sleeve. A failed imitation. My name belongs to me. I straighten my shoulders, feel the weight lift, and take the first step down, then another. Each one is lighter. I left the courtroom no longer a retired teacher. I was the woman who had just taught her final lesson. Os. The house was quiet when I returned from court, too quiet. My shoes clicked against the hardwood, and every echo felt exaggerated, as if the walls themselves were testing the weight of my footsteps, asking if I was the same woman who had left that morning. I set the folder of documents on the dining table, but I didn't open it. The verdict was already written in my bones. I had won. The papers were only proof for strangers. My body, my breath, my spine, all of me already knew. Then I saw it. The apron. It lay draped over the arm of a chair, limp and faded. Its pattern, a memory of flowers that once had color. The same apron Sophia had pressed into my hands on Mother's Day, smirking, her voice dripping with venom. This suits your mother-in-law better, old cheap, just like her. I picked it up. The fabric felt rough, like sandpaper, the threads loose in my fingers. I stared at it for a long time, waiting for the shame to wash over me the way it had that night. But nothing came. No sting, no heat in my cheeks, no tremor in my chest. Only a hollow laugh. I laughed because the insult had lost its teeth. because the very cloth meant to reduce me had become the evidence of what I had endured and overcome. I walked to the wall by the kitchen, the same wall where my late husband once hammered in nails for family photos. With a single pin, I hung the apron there. It sagged awkwardly, crooked, defiant. Not a trophy, not a wound. Just an artifact. A witness. Now, instead of hiding in a drawer, it faced me openly. And every time I glanced at it, I didn't feel humiliation. I felt something lighter, something close to amusement. The house still carried the scent of furniture polish, remnants of mornings when I'd cleaned before Daniel and Sophia visited. But tonight, the air tasted different, emptier, freer. I moved from room to room, running my hands over tabletops, over the banister, over the stack of textbooks in my bedroom. They all seemed to belong to me again. Not to anyone's story about me, but to mine. I boiled water for tea. The kettle hissed, then whistled. A sound I hadn't heard in weeks because I had been too tense to notice it. I poured the steaming liquid into my cup, sat at the kitchen table, and looked up at the apron hanging on the wall. It didn't mock me now. It didn't diminish me. It reminded me of survival, of resilience, of the strength that had carried me through years of teaching and years of sacrifice. The clock ticked. The house remained still. Outside, the street lights blinked on. And in the silence, I whispered, not to Daniel, not to Sophia, not to the judge, but to myself. The apron once turned me into their servant. Now it is only a scrap of cloth hanging loose. I sold the house. The papers were signed on a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind of morning when the air feels washed clean after rain. I didn't linger. I didn't walk from room to whisper goodbyes. I had already said farewell long ago. Each time Sophia spat her contempt across those walls, each time Daniel stood silent. To me, the house was only timber and brick now. Its warmth emptied with their respect. With the sale complete, I booked a one-way ticket. Not to a nursing home, not to another suburb where whispers could follow me. I chose Italy, a small town outside Venice, where canals curve like sentences and cobblestones hold centuries of footsteps. When I arrived, the air smelled of espresso and salt. My rented flat overlooked a tiny square, and across from it stood an old library with pale stone walls. I found myself walking there every morning, drawn as if the building knew my name. The librarian, a gentleman with spectacles too large for his face, welcomed me like an old colleague. "You taught?" he asked, after spotting the notebooks I carried. "Oping years," I said. He nodded, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did. Soon, I built a routine. Each morning I crossed the square, cappuccino warm between my palms, sunlight slanting through the cafe window. I carried one or two of my battered textbooks with me, the same volumes Sophia once mocked. Children from the neighborhood gathered, curious at first, then eager. I read aloud, stumbling through Italian verbs but laughing when they corrected me. I gave them pencils, taught them songs, showed them how to shape letters slowly, carefully, until the words began to dance on the page. I donated most of my books to the library, but I kept a small stack in my room. Pages stained, margins scribbled, spines cracked. I thought they might fall apart on the journey, but they held firm, like I had. One afternoon, as I guided a little girl through the alphabet, a tourist passed by the window. He stopped, fascinated, then lifted his phone to film. A week later, someone showed me the video online. Old Teacher Opens Library Cafe in Venice. It had spread across screens, strangers leaving comments in languages I didn't understand, but recognized by their warmth. I smiled when I saw it. Not because of the attention, but because someone, somewhere, had captured the truth. I was not a woman erased. I was a woman beginning again. I no longer carried the apron. It had served its purpose back in that house. Here, in this new life, I had no need for relics of cruelty. What I carried instead was ink on paper, the sound of children's laughter, the smell of coffee at dawn. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings, I wrote, not lesson plans, not ledgers of bills, but stories, mine. I wrote about chalk dust and sleepless nights, about betrayal and trials, about the taste of freedom I had thought was too late to claim. and each page reminded me that my voice was intact, steady, my own. Looking back, I see it clearly now. Sophia's insult, Daniel's silence, the forged signature. All of it was their attempt to edit me out of my own life. But no one else holds the pen. I was never their faded apron. I am the ink that still writes my freedom. I want to pause here and speak to you directly. Thank you for walking this road with me. Through the whispers, the courtroom, the laughter that was never kind, and the silence that hurt more than shouting ever could. I am Eleanor White, 71 years old, once mocked with a cheap apron on Mother's Day, and now the keeper of my own key. It took me decades to realize that the chains I felt around my wrists were not iron, but habit. That apron was not just cloth, it was contempt disguised as a gift. I wore the insult like skin until I chose to hang it on the wall, strip it of its power, and step beyond it. And so I want to ask you, if one day your own family reduced your life to a rag, would you stay silent? Or would you weave your own ending? You don't need a courtroom to reclaim yourself. You don't need a verdict stamped in ink. Sometimes the bravest act is simply saying, no more. Sometimes the loudest statement is changing a password, packing a suitcase, or pouring your own cup of coffee without waiting for permission. I cannot tell you which road to take, but I can tell you this: silence corrodes, while truth, even trembling, repairs. If my story has touched you, leave a comment, share it, follow along. Not for me alone, but for the mother scrolling in the dark, the grandmother clutching a quiet grief, the neighbor who hides her tears in the garden. Somewhere, someone is waiting for a sign that they are not alone, that their voice still matters. Maybe your words can be that sign. I was once called cheap, irrelevant, old, a burden. I carried all those labels until they nearly buried me. But the moment I spoke for myself, I remembered something my students used to write in shaky cursive: we can always begin again. I began again, and so can you. I am not their apron. In my freedom, stitched by my own hands, on knots slushed as not she.